This is Create the Next from ProCFO Partners, where every week we explore strategies and ideas for financial management and growth to help today's businesses put their financial picture in context.
Welcome back to Create the Next. I am Chris Bentliff, and today I'm joined by Todd Sloan. And Todd, we're talking today about growth. And one of the things that you shared with me earlier was how different companies in different stages, if I'm in maybe an early stage, mid stage, maybe a later stage, have different priorities. One of my questions for you to just start off is, how do I know which stage I'm in? Because in my experience, a lot of companies stay in one stage behaving behaviorally much longer than they should. They've moved past whatever, revenue-wise or employee-wise or whatever, but they're stuck with some habits or behaviors that aren't serving them in that new stage. So tell me what you think, the guidance on how should I be calibrating the stages I'm in?
Yeah, so stage, the early stage, maybe it's a little more obvious because you're either doing sort of a seed financing, you are pre-revenue. You are just starting to kind of understand what the market opportunity is. You are very early in sort of your employee pool. Maybe it's just you and a couple of founders who have an idea. And you've kind of tested, kind of looked at what the market looks like, but you really haven't, hired a bunch of people yet. You haven't gone out to venture capitalists, if you will, to raise money. And you're kind of either bootstrapping the idea. So the early stage is, pre-revenue, pre-bunch of employees, pre-funding, really. So that's kind of maybe that's easier. As you kind of go down the path, a lot of it kind of like, stages are different these days in the sense of, are you now raising Series A, Series B, Series C? So the letters don't always describe the stage of the company. Things have changed over the decades in terms of, when you start to raise, Series A versus Series B. But typically it used to say Series B, wouldn't come in until there was some revenue opportunity that started to generate.
All right.
Series C might start to help you really hire more people, hire sales folks. Series D, Series E would be much later in the game. So the funding stages, are a little blurred compared to what they might have been, decades ago. But it all depends on, where you are sort of in the product adoption mode, and the hiring sales capacity and starting to build out go-to-market functions. So that kind of blurs a little of the line between sort of B, C, and D.
So should I be, as I'm thinking about scaling and funding for growth, should I be keeping an eye on who I want to be early on? Or am I in my early stage where I'm just kind of trying to figure out that product market fit and all the things that you described? Am I really trying to get to that? That my goal is just like, let's get some funding, get this idea off the ground, validate it a little bit, do what we want to do. Or should I be thinking, but maybe in 3 to 5 years, we want to be here. And then once I'm in mid-market, should I be thinking, well, maybe in 3 to 5 years, we want to be here? Or should I be just kind of really focusing my energies on making the most of and creating the most success I can in the stage that I'm in?
Well, I think for most companies, you obviously want to set goals, put business plans in place, think about, 1-year goals, 2-year, 3-year goals, 5-year goals. And kind of keep track, through, how you're progressing into those stages. So, it's important to understand, what problem, when you think about the early stages, what problem am I trying to solve? What is the market opportunity? So what's the TAM, if you will? So the total addressable market that's out there. And how do I kind of deliver upon those needs, through each of these stages? So I think that's important to stay focused and understand what your short-term, midterm, and long-term goals are, and how you can start kind of build and achieve and sort of knock down some of those milestones as you progress through the process.
So as I think about that, I'm thinking about the skill sets required. So in that early stage, we're really, tell me if you agree, we're really the energy, the network, the enthusiasm of the founders is really a driver for success. But once we get success in that space, that doesn't necessarily change, but now we need new expertise, new guidance on, well, now here's what's required, as you described, for some of that mid-market funding. Do I need to start thinking about adding people to my team, adding expertise to my team? Do you find that companies are slow to do that? Is that a point of friction where founders or leaders are trying to do too much themselves continually because they started off with that raw energy and that's kind of setting a precedent for them? How do I navigate through that a little bit?
Yeah, that's dead on. The founders typically have certain skill sets and maybe not other skill sets. Company I'm working with right now, it's a prime example. The founders are software engineers, excellent, CTO type individuals.
Yeah.
But early stage, they're not funded well, so they're trying to do everything, right? Including trying to play, finance and HR roles and recruiting roles and so forth, and things that are definitely not their strengths. So at what point in time do they look at sort of adding to the team? And really sort of building it out, whether you start adding, finance folks, whether you start adding HR folks, sales folks, because early stage, they kind of bootstrap themselves and, they obviously don't want to sort of bring in too much financing early because that dilutes their ownership and a lot more sort of, cooks in the kitchen to try and tell them what to do. But they have to understand as they move through these stages that they can't do everything and they need to build a team up, build a management team and start to, handing off things that they're not experts in, and staying focused on what they're really good at. So, that's a prime, situation. I'm not trying to make a plug for like ProCFO, but, bringing in that part-time CFO to start helping them in a lot of areas that that's not their strength. So that's the journey, as you kind of move from early stage to mid stage and starting to bring on, the management team that helps you kind of move, and start to achieve more of those objectives and goals as you're progressing through the different stages of the company's life.
I think this is a key point, and whether it's a CFO or there's other aspects of the business too that require some element of expertise, but each of these stages, as you described, require some acumen that is necessary in that early stage. Like we said, the hustle can get you a long ways, but then it can't. And I'm wondering if you have some specific advice or guidance. How do I know when I should be bringing on somebody like a CFO, and two, what criteria should I be expecting of that CFO? Because, I think a lot of folks still, misdefine, underutilize, underestimate the value strategically of where the CFO should be positioned to help with some of the things that you're describing. And I want to make sure people understand the impact that can be had by having this sort of expert that can see things that you can't see. So my two questions, how do I know? And what should I be looking for?
Yeah, one of the things I think is important is to have the right advice around the table. So to reach out to different types of advisors through the process. An example here is this company that I'm working with right now. I've known the founder for a long time, and we've always had conversations as he's sort of a few years ago came up with this idea. But I've also noticed that he has advisors around the table that are in sales, marketing. So he's always done a good job, or he and his co-founder have always done a good job of seeking advice without actually engaging anybody that quickly through his network. If you want to focus specifically on, the CFO role, there's a lot, as he's been thinking about the journey from a couple of years ago of just kind of creating the opportunity. And he's in the software space. So I think it's important that he was able to get advice and that's a bit of my background is I've been in the software space and sort of the subscription model, if you will. And, he's been, pinging me over the last couple of years with questions, of how to think about certain things. And I think that's helpful as he's kind of formed, created the product offering. So it can be any early stage to think about how you're developing what you're, bringing to market. So I think that's very relevant because it's not just, hey, the CFO is just about, the books and records of the company. It's not. These individuals have a lot of experience, business experience, in the paths and know some of the pitfalls, because we all make mistakes, companies, make mistakes and learn from them and grow, so to have people that have been down that path, that journey through all the different stages of the company and be able to provide advice along the way is super helpful, and, maybe you kind of like obviously avoid certain mistakes that, typical mistakes that are made early on, and you can, as you, construct the company and you're building these goals and objectives, you have some good advice, from some individuals that have been down this path before.
I think that's incredibly valuable perspective that is too often not part of the calculus, which is not just what can we get from adding this person or the skill set, but what do we avoid? What stupid thing will we not do that will cost us a ton of time and money and resources because we have the insight that this expert can provide? And I hope our listeners are putting that in their back pockets. One of the things that makes me curious about is, now if we focus just a little bit on the late stage, they're looking maybe at mergers and acquisitions, they're looking at IPOs. The sophistication, the complexity, very different, not necessarily more, although maybe, but very different from what's happening when I'm just trying to get my seed funding. Do I, that expert that I'm surrounding myself with, or that team of experts, should they be evolving, changing, growing? Can I get that person, let's say it's a CFO, but it could be a sales leader or a marketing leader, that person who's on the table with me early on, am I expected that they'll have the skill sets to help me through these other complex things, or do I need to be thinking about always managing my team differently? What's some advice you have there?
Yeah, no question. Later stage, different profile, different knowledge base, different understanding of, sort of what you're trying to achieve, which, and more often than not, it's about value creation for the company, and the recognition or the validation of that value creation, which can be through IPOs, through M&A, exits of some capacity. So understanding what the investor world or the buying world in M&A is looking for, to be able to, provide the most value, create, opportunity for the company. So, I hate to keep using a software example, but there are definitely KPIs that companies look for, public investors will look for, and to have somebody who's been through that journey, in that mid to late stage journey, to make sure that the company is focused, on where the areas that they need to, improve upon, if you will, as you kind of make that, journey towards that exit or that IPO. There's no question there's, always a handful of key KPIs that investors, public investors or buyers will be looking for. So you can kind of refine the company's path as they go down there and say, hey, we need to focus here. I don't want to use just path to profitability because that's a general statement, but, there could be certain KPIs that are really important to public investors that you need to focus on. And maybe you start investing early, in a certain department that's focused on, retention of, KPIs, things like that. So there's no question, and I've seen that many times, as people, look to, hire myself and say, have you had this experience before? Have you had that experience? And so that journey from early stage to later stage, you will be adding more people to the management team that have those levels of expertise that will help you sort of achieve more value creation.
And what I love about what you're sharing is that it really brings us all the way back to the beginning. If I have the right expert on my team or the right advice or counsel, in that early stage who can ask me, so what's your end game? What's your big idea? How do you get out of this? And they say, well, in a great big dreamy world, we file for an IPO in X years. That person can help me work backwards from that goal and all the time be thinking, if we make this move, if we make that move, that will help us get to this next phase. That will help us be more interesting in that phase. And do you find that is under exercised, that leaders are a little bit too often myopic in that space that they're in rather than thinking big picture? Or is the big picture often found of, but they just need to surround themselves with the right skill sets to get there?
Yeah, there's no question that, they're not thinking that way as much very early on. There's 1,000, I'm sorry?
Could they be?
Having it in the back of your head is helpful, but they're typically so focused on, building a product early on and, the very early stage that it's so far away that it's hard to kind of think about that. The whole trees in the forest comment. Some folks might say, "Oh, that's just way out too far in front of me for me to even focus on that," and that may be fair. And that's why you're not actually bringing a CFO on, and that's somebody that's been through an IPO or something like that at a early stage Series A. But having somebody as an advisor, I think, is helpful because, as you move through the process, they continue to remind you of things you want to focus on, because ultimately, that's what the journey is. It's about creating value, delivering the product, and bringing forward to create the most valuation opportunity, if you will, later on. So, there's 1,000 things early on that they're like, I can't even think about that just yet. But as you go through the journey, you need to be thinking about that, because otherwise, the company might be too much of a major shift, to achieve that, those goals, if you will.
And part of the value of having a diverse team around you of experts is you don't need to think about that right now, but I'm going to think about that right now and help us to kind of navigate into the right space and direction. Todd Sloan, ProCFO Partners. This has been fascinating, talking about profitability, talking about kind of the road to growth, funding. I would love to have you back and just dive into each of these segments. I think we could just talk a lot about the early stage and the mid stage and the late stage and some of the unique aspects there. And I hope you're up to coming back, because I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Thanks, Todd. Have a great day.
All right, you too. Take care.
Thanks for watching, and a special thanks to our subscribers. Consider becoming one today. Visit ProCFOPartners.com for more strategies and ideas for financial management and growth to help you put your business's financial picture in context.